So with us right now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete. The results show when the athletes hit the field from DallasCowboys.com, and you heard him all year long on 99.3 Talk FM doing Talking Cowboys. Bryan Broaddus, how you doing, Bryan?
Hey, good, guys. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for coming on with us. I'm sure you're one of the more popular guys in all of the nation today after the hiring of Monty Kiffin today. Is this a good fit for the Cowboys?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, there's some things personnel-wise that they can do to get into this style of a defense. And, I think it really starts with Bruce Carter and Sean Lee and their ability to play some key positions. They're going to need to find a 3 technique to be that upfield guy, much like what they did with Warren Sapp. But you got Jay Ratliff, hopefully they'll have him back, health-wise and stuff. So they've got some players that they could potentially fit in to this scheme. And, that's where, the owner had a fundamental difference of what he wanted to do defensively. The Tampa scheme that Monty Kiffin brings in is a little bit more of a scheme that they can, there's not so many bells and whistles to it. It's not to say they can't do things coverage-wise or blitz-wise out of it, but it's going to be a lot different than what they played under Rob Ryan. And I think that, like I say, the owner and the general manager was, that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to get back to something where it was about the players lining up and finding ways to make plays instead of being a track meet between the huddle and the field and the sideline, and there was, Rob Ryan, for all the things he did, he did the best he could to match things up, but you got to remember this about the general manager here. He's played in this scheme before, and when I was here as a scout with Mike Zimmer and Dave Campbell and those guys, we ran a form of this style of a defense. So he's familiar with what it can do. So that's what they're going to do going forward now.
Okay, what kind of grade would you have given Rob Ryan for the job that he did for the last couple of years?
You guys, like you said, you had Talking Cowboys on quite a bit down there, so
yeah. We
always were very complimentary of Rob and what, he was able to take some Band-Aids and try and put on this defense. And, I think, there's people that say there are things that are unfair by, him having to call defense without several of the starters, out there. And, I think that's a legitimate argument. But, if you look overall, though, it's not my decision or Mickey Spagnuolo's decision. It's ultimately the general manager's decision, and he wanted to, he felt like that he wasn't getting the production out of the defense that he thought he should with Rob Ryan. And, he could cite the things that happened, early in the year that, they did have the full complement of players, but he wasn't satisfied, then and then throughout the season. He felt like there were some things they improved on. But ultimately, though, he was more interested in going back to this 4-3 scheme and making that work. And and with Monty Kiffin, leaving USC, well, that gave him the opportunity to get back into a scheme that he's again familiar with and wants to see his defense run.
And taking nothing away from Monty Kiffin and the experience he's got, and obviously he is a very accomplished defensive coach, but Jerry Jones couldn't sit tight and go with status quo next year and keep an angry fan base happy, right?
Well, it's an angry fan base right now. Let's not fool ourselves here. I mean, I don't think many people are very happy about Monty Kiffin being here. They felt like why would you hire a 72-year-old man to come in here and cue all the old jokes and everything like that. But, from the evaluations that they had, I mean, they have scouts that go out to USC and see him coach on a daily basis, evaluate their players. Their report was the fire still burns bright there. He's interested in coming back and, last 4 years being out of the league. And, his track record speaks for itself.
Sure.
Now, can he find some coaches to come along with him? And right now at Valley Ranch here, they're interviewing the coaches that remained from the Rob Ryan staff. And there's a couple of guys on the staff that can absolutely help them. I think that Jerome Henderson is a secondary coach. Brian Baker's a defensive line coach. Joe Baker's a secondary coach as well. They've got some guys that they could, Monty Kiffin, could surely use. But again, it's going to be, he's probably got his eye on a couple of guys. They're waiting for, if Lovie Smith were to get a job, then maybe Rod Marinelli then would go as his defensive coordinator. If not, then maybe Monty Kiffin can convince Rod Marinelli to come down here and be a part of the defensive line group here. So, yeah, it's one of those things right now. He's trying to put together a staff, but, from all indications, he's going to hit the ground running, and that's really, I think, the most important thing for this team.
And I asked the question in the wrong way. I was talking about the angry fan base in terms of finishing the year 8-8 for a second straight year. You couldn't just go with the status quo. Changes were going to have to be made just to appease the Cowboy fan base, whether they were good changes or not, right?
Well, yeah, I think that, and that's the thing, Brian, that was the biggest problem was that when Jerry Jones came out and talked about the disappointment and all, and people were like, it's just lip service. It's Jerry being Jerry. It's Jerry being hacked off and all that. No, I worked for the man for 6 years. I knew that he was upset. I knew he wasn't happy the last 2 years to be on the doorstep of winning the NFC East and then all of a sudden getting bounced. I knew that things were going to happen, and I was really surprised that people were just kind of just waving their hand and saying, Jerry's just going to be Jerry here. But and let me be honest with you, I don't think this is the last of changes.
No.
I don't think Jason Garrett's going to be calling the plays next year. Now, whether they bring somebody else in or elevate Bill Callahan, that's still up on the air right now. So yeah, these defensive coaches are getting interviewed, but I guarantee you on the offensive side of the ball, now the general manager and the head coach are trying to figure out, okay, what's the best route to kind of get the offense where it needs to be.
Now, Brian, the thing about going to the 4-3 from the 3-4 is not only now have you got all these holes that you've got to fill to solve your problems on the offensive line, now you've got to start drafting some personnel to fit that system that just those guys aren't at Valley Ranch right now. So it seems like it's created even more need than there was before. Am I wrong in suggesting that?
Well, I believe that they were going to need offense and defensive linemen. Just take a look at this depth chart again. The times we talk about, down your station there on Talking Cowboys, we've always talked about the offensive line. I've come out, the last season, when we were having a little off-season talk, was talking about the defensive line. Look at the age of Spears and Coleman and those guys. Excuse me, and then who are the backup? I mean, you've got some guys that have some age on them. They've had some guys that have broken down, and so they were going to have to draft offense and defensive linemen anyway. And for what I've seen so far in this defensive line draft, they've done about 15 players. There's some players that can help them. Those combination guys that can play either an end or play as a defensive tackle. And that's something that they're definitely going to have to look at. But again, there's some offensive linemen in this thing that can help them too. So at least the positions that they're looking at, offensive line, defensive line, safety, there's some numbers there that they could actually kind of stretch through and maybe have a shot here. They're also going to need to look at a backup running back as well. So, yeah, I think the needs are still the same. I just think that it's just now instead of a 3-4, it's a 4-3 defense.
What do they do with Anthony Spencer now?
I don't think Anthony Spencer's going to be here. I mean, it's just my gut feeling. I feel this is going to be a situation that's very similar to what happened to Mario Williams last year in Houston. They're not going to have the cap space. The franchise tag is going to be over $10 million, and they could try and get a deal done, but if they don't have the money to get that done or to get the franchise tag on, then he's going to have an opportunity to walk and go somewhere else. And I honestly believe that they were grateful that for $8 million last year, they got a great bargain in the way he played. Now, do they want to do that year after year? Well, I don't think that's the case. So, with that being said, I think you'll probably see Anthony Spencer walk on, and they'll go and draft and do whatever they have to do.
Okay, and then as far as the defense is concerned, if you had to play with the guys that are there right now on the defensive line, I mean, how would it stack up? I guess Ware playing with his hand down in the dirt at the defensive end, and then who else?
Well, what you would do then is, like you said, it would be Ware would play one end. You'd play a 3 technique, which would probably be Ratliff.
Okay.
Played a 3 technique. The 1 technique right now would be probably Sean Lissamore. The left end would probably be Tyron Crawford, is who that would be. And then as you go from the outside linebacker, strong side outside linebacker would be Wilbur, and then Albright, and then inside at Mike linebacker would be Sean Lee, and the weak outside linebacker would be Bruce Carter. So as it sits right now, that's kind of what your defense looks like in the front seven.
And there's some concern about whether your secondary could play the kind of defense that Kiffin plays, but I can't imagine the corners having much of a problem. So it sounds like it's all reliant on getting decent safeties in here to be able to play that defense.
Well, the safeties are going to be real important here. You know, you're probably going to get Barry Church back, and they got Matt Johnson, who they drafted last year, who could play, but he didn't play, you know, at all down this whole season, you know, and so, you know, but still, they feel like they have to go draft a safety there. Danny McCray is just going to be a special teams guy. I don't see him being a guy that figures into having to play many more defensive snaps. The problem with these corners, though, it's not the coverage. In this Tampa 2 defense, the corners are responsible for funneling the run inside to the linebackers and to the safeties. And if you don't have physical corners on the outside, you're going to get beat up a lot. And that's the one thing that Carr and Claiborne and those guys are going to have to figure out real fast. How much do you want to stick your nose in there and play like Rondy Barber does and make sure that stuff goes inside instead of spills to the outside?
Okay, now flipping over to the offensive side, you talked about it. I mean, that offensive line, of the guys that are currently on that offensive line, how many of them can expect to have jobs next year?
Well, I think that's going to be the trick. I mean, I think Doug Free is back. You know, there was talk about maybe Jeremy Parnell would be the guy that play at right tackle. We'll have to see where the cap savings, if they put Doug Free on the street, that's a $7 million savings this year, but then a $7 million hit next year. So, you know, they got to figure out that real fast. I would think that maybe they would look at moving Mackenzie Bernardo from right guard to center and then potentially drafting a right guard. I think that might be the route they go. Again, they can't sit there and concentrate on just the offensive line. They have to think about the defensive line too, and the running back and the safety as well. So, you know, maybe they could parlay some picks into some things and see where the value is on the board. But I have a feeling that you're going to see a couple more guys shuffle around there, and maybe, again, a right guard move to center, and then maybe draft a right guard if they have to.
And then there's obviously all the hot talk, even before the defensive coach's change was made, was still about who was going to be calling plays next year.
Yeah.
And with the offensive personnel that the Cowboys had on that line, would it have mattered who was calling plays?
I think there was I think that people really were very, very critical of the offensive line, and rightfully so in some respects. The problem is, though, we tend to evaluate 2 or 3 plays where you need to evaluate 65 plays. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think that's, you know, yeah, if you have 2 or 3 bad plays out of 65, you know, they could be critical plays. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, I think you didn't have DeMarco Murray. I mean, he was out for 6 games. The running game clearly is better with DeMarco Murray running the ball. I mean, he can make some of the, so if you don't block things clean, at least DeMarco Murray can make people miss or be physical enough to get, you know, positive yards. So, yeah, I mean, you had a guy almost threw for 5,000 yards as a passer, you know, and then you had the receivers. The tight end set the NFL record for tight end receptions. So, you know, to say, you know, who's calling the plays and all that, I mean, they did have some production. Again, the production didn't translate into points, and that's what they have to figure out.
So what's your gut feeling? Are they going to just hand it over to Callahan, or is he going to go out and get a whole new offensive staff?
I don't think it's go out and get a whole new offensive staff. I think if it's somebody that they have in mind, you know, I think that they would like to. And I even talked to Bill Callahan myself yesterday afternoon, and I asked him, I said, have they asked you about calling plays? He says it's something we've talked about. He says, the thing, though, you have to realize, though, if I call plays, you know, someone's going to have to help coach with the offensive line. He's more than comfortable with Wesley Phillips being that guy to help him out, you know, because he's going to have to concentrate on the passing game and the running game as well. It's something he would like to do. They have it on the table, but it might be a position where they say, okay, who's out there, and is that guy better than maybe just letting Bill call the plays? If I'm Jason Garrett, let me be real honest here. I want Bill Callahan calling the plays.
Sure.
I don't want somebody else coming in here and, you know, and changing everything up. But again, I think the changes coaching-wise will probably come on the defensive side of the ball. But then again, there could be 1 or 2 offensive coaches when the cuts from the offense start. You know, here in the next few days, where we can see that being a change. And
then, you know, the one thing that has happened with all of this stuff going on is kind of taken a real white-hot spotlight off of Tony Romo. I've always been a Tony Romo defender, but after the game against the Redskins, it makes it real hard. And I'm just wondering if
What's hard about defending Tony Romo?
Oh no. Well, what's hard?
Are you going to base it on one game?
No. I'm talking about when I have to talk to callers and I keep trying to tell them, look, Tony, if you don't have Tony Romo, you're not even in a position to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, just remind them of those days with Dave Campo when they used to play with baseball. When they used to play a baseball player quarterback.
You're preaching to the choir, dude.
Yeah, because no, I lived that. Okay, and
you're preaching to the choir.
When you have Chad Hutchinson here and Drew Henson and all that, and,
Quincy.
Well, at least Quincy Carter took the team to the playoffs.
True.
But I mean, I will say this though, and you're absolutely right. Tony Romo has had his problems, just absolutely. But if you look at this team and the way he played this year and the things that he was able to do, again, I'm not defending him because but I've learned to accept with the brilliance, you're also going to have some duds, and it's just unfortunate that seems when they need him the most, he had a dud,
right.
and that's the thing about it. But again, you got to look at the wide receivers. In a big game, what did Miles Austin do? He had 0 catches.
Sure.
Some of these receivers did a very good job of getting open, and even when they had the opportunity to potentially win this football game, he made a wrong read, he made a mistake. Again, Tony Romo has fallen on that one, absolutely. And I'm not washing my hands of that, but just remember back in the day, if you're a Cowboy fan, and we were playing with baseball player quarterbacks,
oh yeah,
then you'll appreciate Tony Romo very, very much.
And let me back up, because having been a Cowboy fan since the early 70s, okay, so I've watched the history of this for a long time, and my concern, I think Tony Romo is an outstanding quarterback. He has flaws, no question about it. But what I have seen in history, I saw Don Meredith's spirit broken to the point that he retired before he was 32 years old. I saw Danny White's spirit seem to be broken, and I'm concerned that could be what might happen to Tony Romo, because the fan base right now, again, the support's starting to wane. It's making it real hard to defend. And what I'm concerned about is it a point? Does there come a point where both the team and the quarterback may be better off having a change of scenery?
Well, right now, until you have a plan of who that guy is.
Right.
You wasted 3 years on Stephen McGee, okay?
Right.
Now, if you told me you had Aaron Rodgers waiting in the wings like we did in Green Bay with Brett Favre, then it's real easy to make that switch.
Sure.
Okay. But until you have somebody in place, until you have somebody in mind, and again, this was our fault with the whole baseball player thing. We didn't have somebody ready after Troy Aikman. Mm-hmm. That was a problem, and now. You better find somebody, and if they have to draft somebody, that's part of it, But you also got to remember this: they did find Tony Romo. They did sign him as a free agent. He was on the board in the 5th round. I'm not saying they're going to get lucky like that again, but you do have evaluations like that, and maybe there is a guy out there like that. But they sure need to address that position, because you're absolutely right. One more year like this, Tony Romo does nobody any good.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm saying this, too, is also the fact that in the playoffs this year, you had 3 guys who were rookies who stepped in. Now, granted, 2 of them, everybody expected them to be, top-flight quarterbacks. Nobody saw Russell Wilson coming in like he did, though.
Well, I saw him in week 2 up wide.
But I'm talking about prior to the season, though.
Well, if you evaluated Russell Wilson, though, Seattle misevaluated that one. They gave Matt Flynn $10 million. If I'm Paul Allen, the owner, I'm like going, okay, whose check do I deduct this $10 million out of? If you guys told me let's go get this quarterback, and you pick one in the 3rd round.
Right.
See, that's why it's the most misevaluated position there is in the draft, because people feel like that height, weight, speed, whatever. They misevaluate quarterbacks more than anything.
And we thought it was going to be a dull off season.
Oh, far from it, my friend.
Never at Valley Ranch, is it?
Never is.
Hey, Bryan, thanks very much for coming on. It's great talking to you. Enjoy your vacation and the slow off season. I know you will.
Yeah, that slow vacation will start around July 4th, but I appreciate it.
For about a week, yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks,
all right, buddy. Thanks for talking to us. We appreciate it. Bryan Broaddus from DallasCowboys.com, talking Cowboys on 99.3 Talk FM. Good stuff. We'll come back. We'll take your phone calls, hear what you've got to say about what he had to say when we return on 99.3 Talk FM.